Hello. Hopefully people can hear me. Scream. Scream in the comments if you can't. Although, how would you know to say? How would you know if you can't hear me? All right. Thanks for coming. Gonna start with a quick apology that I still haven't got the full archive of videos up on YouTube yet. But I am maybe working on it this weekend. I have a bit more time this weekend than last weekend, so we'll see. But today we're going to talk about we're not going to dive too much into technical content or code or algorithms or distributed systems or DNS or anything like we've previously done. I put a question out on Twitter whether people would be interested in covering soft skills, and the resounding response was yes. So today I'm going to talk all about, or relate some of my experiences about how to get people to do things. Kind of mostly from the perspective of an individual contributor or a non-manager, or folks who are on the engineering track, like myself. I've been a manager, but I've also for a long time been an individual contributor, and the approaches are a little different, although 90% of it's probably the same. And this is a really common topic that comes up in one-on-ones. Like, I've had many one-on-ones where on both sides, where I've been asking for advice. How do I get this person to do the right thing, or how do I get this team to do the right thing? Or people come to me with that question, and in those cases, it's I'll ask questions to try to drill in on what the dynamic is or what might be going on, and try to give more specific advice for that actual situation. But today I'm going to try and gather as much as I can remember from those conversations, and share them here. And then one important note on all this is, I'm going to relate my experiences and my advice, and if people have their own comments and opinions and questions, go for it. Let's get them in the chat. I'll respond. But I haven't perfected any of this. It is like always a work in progress. There are many times I go about it in the wrong way, and then have to ask myself after, geez, what was I thinking? Why did I think that would work? Or try to learn from it and improve. Or there's just times where like I'm impatient with myself or others, when that's never helpful, And so don't think that because I'm giving advice or have things to share that I've in some way perfected them, or don't realize, that you can find hypocritical examples where I haven't always applied these things, like anybody. And maybe another little asterisk and a gotcha is, my job, I'm a distinguished engineer at Amazon, which is a VP position. It's pretty senior, and I'm well into my career. I've been a principal engineer for a long time, and then I was a senior principal engineer, and now I'm a distinguished engineer. And the good side of that is, well, hopefully that means I've got a decent amount of experience. But the negative side of that is, folks who whose careers go well and they get promoted and so on, there's a tremendous survivorship bias where, those folks are kind of immune to seeing that, a lot of the things that they did, or a lot of what helped them along the way, can sometimes just be luck, and so don't take anything I'm saying as like the one perfect way to do it. There is no one perfect way to do it. I think everybody should look for a lot of advice from a lot of places and take as much breath as possible, and then see what resonates for them and what's going to be useful, and incorporate that into your approach to things. And I think that's always generally applicable. So don't take anything I'm going to say as gospel either, just because I've been at this a while, or because maybe I have like this senior fancy title or anything like that. That isn't how it works. All sorts of people are much better at this than me. But anyway, let's start diving in. So the question people come with, right, is how do I get, this person to do the right thing, or this team to do the right thing, right? Super common that an engineer or senior engineers especially, get frustrated and when they see, teams just going about things the wrong way or seeing the wrong outcomes happen, and and it can feel like we're powerless and we don't have anything to, it can sometimes feel like, they don't report to me. I don't have any power over them. What am I supposed to do, right? And I guess the first thing I'd say to that is, well, firstly, the framing is kind of wrong, right? We're not trying to get people to do the right thing. It's not our job to make people do things. At least not my job. In fact, I took a little, resolution to myself a long time ago, many, many years ago, to in general basically never tell anybody what to do, right? And to instead use an approach based on, questions and collaborative investigation to figure out together what the right thing is. And that way you build more consensus and everybody's more invested in the outcome and everybody truly has a say, right? And they're convinced that it's the right outcome and the outcome kind of decides itself. And so it's more like the question should be, how do I help us all figure out how to do the right thing, right? So that's the first kind of important part of reframing. It's not about just getting or making people do the right thing. And then the next important piece of framing and one of the top things to consider is, well, how do you even know you're right? You might be wrong, right? And so the first, second I guess thing to kind of apply is, we have to dig in and collaboratively really figure out together what is the right thing to do, and we have to approach that with open-mindedness, right? We have to start from the perspective of what's in my head about what is the right thing to do, even if I have a lot of experience, even if I've seen situations like this many, many times before, still might not be right. This may be an exception, or there might be something new and different about this situation that I don't understand, or my own preconceptions and biases are blinding me to what the right thing is, right? So and that second thing is really important, right? So as we engage with other folks, we're trying to help them, or help us all do the right thing, is you have to start with that open-mindedness and listening to them, right? And actually listening and paying attention to what is their take, why is it they think it's that what they're doing is right, because everybody thinks what they're doing is right. Very few people in this world are deliberately trying to be wrong. That's just it's not something people do. So they've got some rationalization, right? And it's important to listen to that and to really, really take it in. There's a set of rules I've seen out there a lot, mostly applied to arguments or when people have differences of opinion, that truly listening to people really means that you can repeat back their position, ideally, in the most glowing, favorable terms. And you can do that in a way they will fully agree with your summary, right? If you can fully summarize somebody's opinion or position and they go, yeah, you said it beautifully, better than I would have, right? That's what you're aiming for. That's when you're really listening to people, right? That's when and when they know, yep, they fully took absolutely everything in, right? And so I try to apply that to folks where I'm really, really trying to understand what their perspective is, what the dilemmas they're dealing with, what the constraints they're dealing with, everything that's rationalizing their current course of action, and be able to describe it back to them. If I can't do that, then I haven't done the open-minded, listening part, right? So we're not even really ready to begin on whether we're actually can agree about what the right thing to do is, or what the right thing could be, because we don't even have a common understanding yet of our mutual positions or what things are. Now, if you're more senior than someone, much more of the responsibility for that falls on you than them, right? They may not fully understand your position or why you think something else is the better course, and it's going to be on you to explain that, not on them. But we'll get into that in a minute. So those are the first two really, really important things, right? Have open-mindedness, be willing to be wrong. don't be set in your ways. Don't think, don't be arrogant about it, and be very open-minded and approach it like that, right? So let's start there. So I'm gonna, so let's assume that basic approach, right? But let's get into more detail. I'm gonna dive into like what are the common reasons why people might be doing the wrong thing, right? So I'm gonna try to do my document view. We'll see if this works today. Yeah, I think it does. And so I have a few kind of high-level categories that I divide these things into, right? And I handle them each a little differently, right? And so the first category is they simply don't know like what the right thing to do is. They're just like missing some knowledge or experience, right? Like they've just never really done it, right? So it's a pretty common reason. We'll dive into that. Then another common reason, especially in engineering, is or maybe any work of life or any course of activity, is habits, right? Where the habits people have just take them down the wrong track, and maybe they have an established bad habit and they might even know it, right? But it kind of causes them to do the wrong thing. I have plenty of bad habits. I'll go into some. or Abby can go into many of them for us. But and then the third one, which is the hardest one to deal with, but you end up dealing with more and more. The more senior you get, the more advanced the dilemmas are. Is I'm gonna get them all on one screen. Is basically fear. The people are afraid to do the right thing, right? And these are in my experience of conversations, these are the common causes, and they each have slightly different approaches and remedies. And I'm gonna try and cover them in this order, and we'll see what we learn. And like I said earlier, if people have different comments or thoughts, give them to me, because I want to learn too. So let's start with don't know, right? So, maybe someone's building something slightly wrong. They're using the wrong algorithm, or they're using a library that's terrible, or they're, they just don't know how to do something the right way, right? Like guarantee if I tried to cook almost any dish apart from like 3 or 4, I would not know how to do it, and I would start doing it the wrong way, because I am not really someone who cooks, and so I just wouldn't know, right? And so in this situation, it's almost like directly in the wheelhouse for an engineer is help them learn, right? Like and it can be as simple as like explaining to folks, and being good at being didactic and teaching people things, right? And I'd say the key things for here are, remembering that somebody not knowing something, like we're all born not knowing basically everything, right? We have some instincts that we're born with. We know how to breathe, but like basically we have to learn everything. Everybody has to learn everything at some point, right? And so it is unbelievably toxic, and you do see it in some technical communities, to treat people who don't know something with like a lack of respect just because they don't know it, right? And even if they're in a position where maybe they should know it, like so what? Like it's not that, you might feel entitled to not respect them because how dare you have such and such a position or such and such a responsibility and not know X or Y or Z, right? That's like can be a common feeling that people have, but like you got to suppress it because it's not helpful. It doesn't move the needle. People are gonna detect that lack of respect right away. I see a comment that there are lazy people who don't want to learn, and that's true. I'm a lazy person. There's things I don't want to learn, and I'm differently motivated in different fields and so on. But I still think okay, and if you want to exclude people like that from your life, if you can, go for it. But like, you're not earning anybody anything by just treating them with a lack of respect. It doesn't do you any good, doesn't do them any good. So I think start with an approach where, yeah, great. you're a beginner at this thing. You've got some new knowledge to learn. I kind of envy you because this is fun knowledge to learn, and often the beginning of a learning process is more exciting, and it can be harder work and more rewarding than late into a learning process when you're really only learning small bits at a time. Early in a learning process, you can learn really big things really quickly. So it can be exciting and interesting. And if you approach it with that mentality of, wow, look at you, we've got this great opportunity to learn something. I kind of envy you. It can help motivate people, and they can be interested to learn if they're not naturally able to learn already. So I'll write that down, right? Like, start with respect, and then the second thing I'd say is, like, I think most engineers, myself included, overestimate or just how much detail folks can follow quickly, right? Or underestimate just how tediously we have to explain things, or just how patiently we have to go through small things and really look for and confirm that people are understanding as we go, right? So I'll kind of invert that technique we talked about earlier, where as I'm explaining something, I'll be stopping and then asking them to, reflect it back to me, seeing if they can tell me what I just told them in slightly different terms, or see if they can riff on it, really get a sense of whether they understand it. And the more complicated the topic, the more time and the more patience this takes, and we deal with topics in engineering that are hard to learn sometimes, like it's, try sitting down and understanding how Paxos works. You almost certainly won't get it from just reading the paper the first time. It's hard, right? And help can help, right? So, just being patient with people and like going through that is terrible writing. And just going through the topic, like, in small increments, right? But then at the same time, like, often, especially if you're dealing with mature kind of technical folks, often people just have aha moments. Like, you just tell them this thing, or like, oh, light bulb goes off, or they feel nerd sniped or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, now I know how to do it, right? And you can have a lot of interactions like that. So these are really common, and most engineers, do a fair amount of this, and we get better at it the more we do it ourselves. Just like folks get better at things, the more they learn them, and so on. And so that's the don't know category. I'm just gonna toss that aside for a bit because that's relatively straightforward. The next ones are harder, much harder, right? So next, and a really common reason in my experience why people don't do the right thing, at least what we consider the right thing in engineering or business, is just bad habits, right? Like, I myself, for a very long time, before I was a professional software developer, I was an amateur software developer, right? The first 10 years of my career, my official job was a network engineer at different companies, and I would write code mostly in my spare time. And a lot of that code was very widely used. Like, I was writing code that's in the Apache web server, used by millions and millions of websites and, I don't know, billions of people, like, every day. Really important code, right? But I never wrote tests, basically. and a good chunk of that was, just the team environment I was in didn't really promote or, insist on a whole lot of testing. It's an open source project. Everybody's doing volunteer work, and there was this kind of attitude of like, yeah, I know how to write good code and I get it out. And I would do testing. Like, I would have all sorts of testing that I was doing as we were going. I had a whole little test harness on my own development machines to, help me iterate and make sure I'm getting things right. But at the end, there was no like tests that were being committed as part of my, code submissions and so on. But they'd still get in because that was the nature of the project. And so just a really bad habit I had was, well, you don't need to write tests. And I never really considered myself a professional software developer, right? During that phase, I just thought, oh, it's this fun thing I can do in my time? Isn't it fun to be able to work on this big project, right? And then after I joined Amazon, where I was actually hired as a systems engineer, I actually gravitated towards writing code, but I was in a team environment where they insisted on writing tests. There was just like no way you could submit code without pretty good thorough testing. It was just a bar that they insisted upon. And they held that standard no matter what, right? And so I was kind of forced to learn this habit of writing tests. And I found that I could. I started to think of myself, I can be a professional software developer. This isn't so hard. I can write tests. Not only that, but I found actually learning to write tests made me a much, much better developer. I could go way more quickly, and I would write the code and I would write the tests more or less at the same time. I'm not like a test first kind of person, like a TDD developer, but I'll do them at the same time. Like I'll have both tabs open and I'm kind of flipping between them. And I just found that like really productive and gave me more confidence in my code, and I could get a better understanding of things because I'm writing my code and then I'm kind of thinking outside my code at the same time, right? And I built this habit, right? Really, 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 because essentially someone made me, right? And our role as engineers sometimes, right? If we have teams or we're working with teams who have bad habits, like they're not writing tests, or maybe they're not paying attention to all the things they should be, is to be there as a positive voice, like not in too negative a way, but in a positive way, just insisting, like just very consistently. And I'll come back to that word consistent a few times because that's going to be an important word. Just consistently insisting on, no, you got to write tests. And there's nothing personal about it. I'm not like demeaning you. I'm not calling you an idiot. I'm not doing anything. I'm just like very neutral about it, but like you got to write the test, And it's our job as senior engineers and mentors or anyone like that in general to like, you got to hold bars like that. You got to help people build good habits, an important part. And sometimes it could drive people crazy. Like sometimes people are like, this is ridiculous. I shouldn't need a test for this. I'm only writing 4 lines. Comes being ridiculous. That's too high a standard. All these kinds of things, right? But I'm at the other end going, but it's really about habit formation too. And we gotta like do it every single time, and we can't lower our standards. So you gotta write the test, And people can, like I said, it can drive them crazy. They can think you're an asshole for like insisting on these things. We can all think of, artistic temperaments where this happens too, right? Like the chef who just absolutely insists, like, no, it has to be perfectly flavored or I'm not even serving it. Like that standard matters, right? Or, the musicians who rehearse until they absolutely can't get it wrong, and they put in that level of effort. And it can drive some people crazy, right? But like it does, it is a good work ethic and it's a good thing. And, at the end of the day, we're all the standard, whatever standard we insist on, right? And having those high standards matters a lot. And those habits, they become self-reinforcing, right? I've been working on a habit lately. I walk or run every day right now for the last 105 days because I'm just trying to get that habit into me where I'll just do it, And I do like 10K every day. It's a pretty big investment. And I'm just making myself do it. But I don't really have to make myself do it anymore. Like at this point, I'm like, yeah, I just get up, I'll go for a run. There's all sorts of books about how to build habits. It's a really strong area of psychological research. I found the Atomic Habits book really useful for a lot of insights in all sorts of cool ways. I'd find some material that goes pretty deep on habits because I find anything you can help people learn or anything we can help ourselves learn that's just like self-repeating and self-reinforcing can be really, really powerful, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. And so you want to be good at building good habits and you want to be good at breaking bad habits, right? So what are the key things here? I guess I said consistency, which we'll come back to. Is important. Habits ultimately are just about consistency, right? They're about doing the same thing every single time in like repeatable ways, and positivity, right? we all respond to positivity more than we think, and more than to negativity, right? So like whether we're giving people feedback, giving them lots of positive reinforcement tends to be more effective. And if you are giving people negative feedback, no matter how simple, it is still useful to like remind them of the positive at the same time, because that's just how we all work. But when you're trying to help people build habits, you want to, like, it's very helpful to have that kind of positive sense of motivating people rather than like a negative or demeaning one. Which, like the chef example, people can fall into, right? We've all seen those TV shows where some chef is insulting all the junior chefs, and I'm not so sure that's the most effective, at least not in the the tech industry. All right, I'm gonna leave habits there for a bit, and we're gonna go to fear. And I'm gonna read the comments just for a second because I see there's a bunch coming through. All right, so any advice on teaching styles to have more success? I don't know. I find I've gotten better as a teacher by teaching more, just like any skill. The more I practice it, the better I get. I've never found a perfect way. I don't think I'm the best teacher, so I don't know who the best people to ask might be. But I do, one thing I do find useful is to try to be learning a new skill yourself, pretty much at all times. Like I recently bought a mandolin, which I hadn't played in 15 years, and I've been relearning all the fingering and how to play mandolin. And it just reminds me what it's like to be a learner and a beginner, you know, and gives you some humility. It's a nice little refresh for like what the other side might feel like, right, if you have to teach people. And I think that does work. What about folks who don't know and who think they know everything? If you're dealing with very arrogant people, people who just have no self-awareness or humility, that can be very challenging. And I'm not sure I have the best advice for you other than try to get rid of them. like it's we don't have to help everybody improve, but it's I don't know that I have the best advice for that one either. Were pull requests accepted into Apache H3 without tests those days? Yes. But not now. Someone says notions. That's a great word. It means a lot. In Ireland, you just said the word notions. There's a lot of deep meaning associated with that word. What are my differences on cultural differences between Ireland and the US? Oh my God, that's a big topic. I'll come back to that at the end and remind me if I haven't. All right, we're going to go into fear, which is the hardest and maybe biggest topic here. A lot of the times people don't do the right thing, and it's especially common when they know it's the right thing, is because of fear, right? It's because they're afraid to do the right thing. And there's a bunch of things can be causing them to be afraid of doing the right thing, you know? Sometimes it's that they are... they're kind of in a bit of a context collapse where they just kind of don't really see the bigger picture, right? And this can happen when people are like feel like they're in an emergency or like in a situation of extreme urgency, or just in a system of extreme stress, like a team that's just being overworked and, you know, just relentlessly at it. Maybe they've got some operational challenge or something like that, you know, and people go into survival mode when they're in situations like that, you know, and they get very defensive and they're very, you know, reluctant to think about changes. They've got their heads down, set on a plan. They want to be able to just get through those things. They find comfort in, you know, in that. And so because that's so common, one of the simplest things to do can be to help them see the bigger picture, right? And to kind of step back and go, hey, so you're telling me like, hey, I need you to do this feature, but you're telling me you're just way too busy right now. You can't possibly do it. Like, come back in a month or something like that. And often for things like feature prioritizations, that's the right answer. And if you listen to them, maybe you'll come to the same conclusion, right? But sometimes for things like improving the operational processes, you know, you have to have them step back and go, okay, doing this work I understand it's going to take you, let's say 2 days, right? And you feel like you don't have those 2 days right now because you're just like constantly under the gun. But step back a bit and look at the month or the year. Like, if you do this 2 days, it's going to save you weeks, months over the year. So be willing to suck, make things a little worse for those 2 days to get this done. Because if you step back, you're going to have an overall improvement that's going to be long-term and sustaining. And that's a really common situation where folks get trapped into these, operationally heavy processes. They end up resorting to doing a lot manually. They feel like they just have to throw themselves with, hard sweat to just keep up with things. I've seen our teams fall into this. I've seen customers' teams. I've seen competitors' teams fall into this. It can be a common situation. Sometimes externally driven. Maybe there can be a huge launch that's very successful, or some kind of DDoS attack or something like that, right? And it's important to be able to help people step back and go, okay, but look at the bigger context. You got to be able to balance for the whole thing. So context, like getting people out of that context collapse, is important. And then the next piece of like context collapse that can happen to people is, okay, well, they're basically afraid to do the right thing because it's a change, and they don't know how to communicate those changes, or they don't feel safe to communicate those changes. It's like, oh my God, if I do this, then I can't do XYZ, which I promised my boss I'd do. Super, super common. Or promise my customer we'd do. Now at Amazon, we're really careful with the promises we make to customers. If we're talking about customers before we've launched something, we basically don't give them dates and we tell them everything we tell you is subject to change, because if we have operational or security events or reasons to shift this, we will. So like we're pretty disciplined about that to give ourselves leeway. But not everywhere is, and sometimes you can end up in those situations, right? And so their fear isn't the change itself. It's that, oh my God, I'm going to have to bring bad news to my boss or the customer or whoever's talking to the customer. And I just don't know how to communicate that, or I don't feel safe to communicate that, right? And so something I've learned, especially the more senior I've got, is like, just take that on. See if you can help them with it. Just as you approach them, like suss out, well, is that what's going on? And if that's what's going on, like, I'll take the hit. I'll talk to your boss. I'll talk to your customer, And, I've worked on how to communicate diplomatically and how to, how to handle those situations, how to give people bad news, how to upset people. And, it's useful to help coach people on that. They need to get good at that themselves. But sometimes, especially folks like at the beginning, they just need someone else to do it sometimes. Sometimes you just need to get in there and be their firewall, and then, but like sussing out that situation, like figuring out, is that what's going on? And then like helping them with it, like can be very transformative. Because otherwise, like if you just go shallow, they're just going to tell you no, right? And you're not going to get any result. It's not going to happen because they're still just afraid to tell their boss or whatever, right? I totally understand for them. It can be pretty intimidating, right? And since we all have finite capacity to do things, pretty much any time you're asking a team or a person to do something, like they basically have to reprioritize. Other things have to not happen, right? Or happen on a different schedule. And so this can be like just a super, super common reason why things, come about like that. So I'm going to write communicate with them, or really on their behalf as like one of the techniques there. So it's pretty, so that's pretty key. And then I think the last thing I want to say in here, actually something I should have said the whole way through, is assume good faith on pretty much everybody's part. Somebody might be manipulative. They might have bad faith. It's not at all common where I work. can be common in other environments, maybe like politics, but I find, at least in a technical arena, it's just easier to assume everybody's acting in good faith and has good rationalizations for why they're doing things. But anyway, those are the big things. Those are my top reasons, right? Like people either don't know what to do, so we got to help them understand, or they have bad habits, in which case we got to help them build better habits and help ourselves while we're at it, or they're just afraid, right? And we have to handle those things differently. The other afraid cases, so the one to communicate upwards, that's really common, right? But another one that's really common is you're just afraid of the change. You know, there's that common ethics class where they ask you, like there's 5 people on one train track and there's 2 people on the other, and the train is currently headed towards the 2. Or headed towards the 5, sorry, got it wrong. So should you pull the lever? And then you go over to the 2, right? And it's like framed as a classic philosophical dilemma, right? And, the the neutral mathematical answer is obvious, right? You should pull the lever and it should go towards the 2, right? But we all have this sense and we all know, okay, but like if I pull the lever and now 2 people die, that's my fault. Like I did that, right? And even if that's a better outcome in air quotes than the 5 people, it's like an outcome I feel responsibility for because we weight action more seriously than we weight inaction, right? And so we feel like, in general, stasis, inertia, how the world is, that just is what it is. But anything different that we want to do, I bear all the risk of whatever changes come about. So if I've got an engineer in my ear who's like, we need to adopt this new framework, we need to like re-architect this way, we need to use microservices or serverless or whatever, right? The person, a reason for fear can be, okay, but if it breaks, it's going to be on us. This thing's been fine for a long time, right? And for that kind of fear, we need to figure out how we can surround them with this safety net that makes sure it's going to go well, right? And can have lots and lots of testing and reinforcement along the way. And also, as you're going, try to build this culture of like, if it does go wrong, okay. Like we get that. But there's still benefits. And we still have to be able to make changes and to make things happen. So that's another reason why people can be, have fear around change and just need to be helped and given a little bit of a safety net, and that can be our role. And so something I haven't mentioned here deliberately, right? And I've left to the end, right? Is power. Because when people come, and when I started going to others, about this question, how do I get people to do things? Like they have a very power-centric view in their mind of what the answer should be. They feel like they're asking maybe, how do I get the power you have? Or how do, how do I build that power so that people just do what I want or do what I say, And it's not a very helpful framing in my experience. I'm going to try to explain how I think about all that. And power is a very loosely defined concept. I prefer to think about influence. How can you influence others to do things? It can come from all sorts of different sources, and there's all sorts of ways to think about it. But I'm going to give you some of mine. So first is, we've probably all met somebody very memorable who just had like a lot of charisma, right? Who's just like, wow, that person, I am like instantly respect them and want to do what they say, very inspiring people, and if you really drill into what's going on there, they've probably got a pretty strong sense of confidence about themselves, and they're really effective communicators, right? And their words just like resonate, and that is something we can all work on. Great. But I don't think it's that key, to be honest. And I don't see a lot of like charisma-driven, power usage or decision-making in tech, right? It tends to be a more, let's look at the facts and the numbers kind of a field, and it's not really driven quite by personalities in that way. Although, we can all think of exceptions too. But I don't have that much advice for like how to do any of that. I will say that, what we call charisma, or that kind of energy field that can come from people that makes us want to do things, be suspicious of it. It can be very bias prone. There's people naturally empathize with people they see themselves in, and and the opposite for people they don't see themselves in. And so there can be gender and race and all sorts of other biases that kick in if you kind of think of that as a way to go about things. And it's just, so be a bit suspicious, be suspicious of that. But then there's the kind of organizational influential power that comes about basically through consistency, right? So the reason I can work on fear for teams. I can help a team who has fear, and I can be their firewall. And one of the reasons I can be their firewall is I have a fair amount of organizational capital, right? I can step in and vouch for them and kind of safeguard them, right? And the organization trusts me to do that, right? And the reason I have that trust, I think, is because, I've been consistently right enough over a very long period of time, right? I've just consistently communicated, here's what I think we should do, right? Hopefully as clearly as possible. Here's what I think the outcomes could be. And the times where I'm right, hopefully people remember. And hopefully there just aren't too many times where I'm wrong. And even if we don't do what I'm saying, right? Even if people don't follow my recommendation, they'll remember the fact that I was right. If the project goes sideways, right? They'll go, oh, it turns out Colin was right? And you just do that enough. If you're very consistent in how you do that, you can build a very strong kind of organizational influence, right? So if you're just consistently communicating your ideas as well as possible, and you're right about them, right? It does work, I think. Although, remember my comment about survivorship bias right at the beginning. There's probably plenty of people who've done that really well, but it didn't work for them. So you gotta remember that too. But that works. And then another way consistency helps, right, is remember when I talked about habits and setting standards, right? Just being super consistent yourself, like always insisting on a certain bar, gives you a kind of power. Because then people know, like, okay, like Colm's not going to change his mind. He's not going to react any differently. Like, we have to do it this way, Like and that power doesn't come from people like reporting to me or the fact that I tell them what to do or anything like that. It's that the power of my consistency kind of radiates, right? It's like, well, Colm always writes a test or always insists that tests are written for like this project. Like, we just always do it. And it would be like just this major no-no if we didn't, right? Like really noticeable, odd. And people would fear that because that would be the change. Where it's like, oh my God, we pushed this piece of code without a test. That's the change. And just like I was saying, right? Because it's different, because it's not what we've always done, that becomes its own source of fear. Now, I don't think it's smart to like, they say you can, if you want to get people to do what you want, you either have to be able to help them or hurt them. And I don't think it's a smart idea to use hurt as your main way to, motivate people or get them to do what you want. I don't think that's a sustainable, effective strategy. But in this case, it's a very light example of it kind of working for you, where they know, look, this person has a very consistent bar. They always apply it. They never make exceptions to it. This is what they do. So if we were ever to do anything different, that would be its own source of fear, which is kind of useful. And then, mix that with being conciliatory and diplomatic and those kinds of people skills, and all of that can help. So those are my main things. But that's what I think of as like power, right? And there's this, I don't think about power as, the number of people who report to somebody, or, that people have to do what XYZ says. I think, that might work in the military or other very, doctrinaire, very hierarchical structured organizations, but I don't think it works in tech. And I also don't think, just don't think it's as effective. Even in the military, right? If you go to the Pentagon and you meet all the generals who like are literally on a field, like in conducting battles and so on, they do a lot of consensus driven decision making, and they know that they have to get everybody on board and build consensus about what the right thing to do is and so on. All that matters too, and their power is really being able to do that. And there's this another way to see it too is that there's this paradox of power where basically every organization out there, you have to be achieving a level before you'll be promoted to it, right? So like the 4-star general has to prove they can be a 4-star general before they become a 4-star general, right? So they have to be able to exert all the power and influence of a 4-star general before they're a 4-star general, right? So the power can't really come from the 4 stars. The 4 stars is coming from them, right? And that's a really, really important way to see it. And, people can get blinded by rank and think, well, rank just gives you this capability to just tell people what to do or have people follow what you say. And my experience, I have the top rank of an engineer at Amazon. It is it's not that useful. It is, the people who are willing to do what you say based purely on your job title or rank, like, are the most dangerous people. Like, that's not you want to have people who are curious and willing to go deep and challenge you and figure out when you're wrong and all those kinds of things, so in a way you kind of have to de-rank yourself constantly. What a first world problem to have. But now there can be other roles. I'm a call leader at Amazon, which is like an incident commander, it's called at other companies, where in the heat of an incident, like let's say an outage of a web service, I'm on the call, I'm leading the charge. And in that case, often I'm just telling people what to do. But my power in that situation just comes from our processes, not from my rank. In fact, we have, I was a call leader when I was a principal engineer. I think I was a call leader before I was a principal engineer even. It doesn't correlate at all. So there are exceptions. Anyway, those are my big thoughts. Hopefully they were useful on how to get people to do the right thing, which is really how to help all of us figure out what the right thing to do is. All right, I'm going to do a scan of all the questions. So if you got more, put them in now, or comments or thoughts or disagreements. Those are even better. So we'll see. Well, oh yeah, okay. So what are my thoughts on cultural differences between Ireland and the US? Very different. Ireland is, when I was growing up, Ireland was still, a relatively poor country, a very Catholic country, and then in the 90s and on just exploded, and its economy just grew like crazy and transformed. A very young population kind of took over Ireland as they didn't need to emigrate anymore, and Ireland just changed dramatically, like through my teenage years and beyond, and is in many ways like culturally opposite to the US. We have a constitutional amendment, in my lifetime to like legalize divorce. We legalized abortion in Ireland, right? In living memory. Things are unimaginable in the US. If anything, it could go the other direction, right? And they're just very, very different culturally. And then Ireland's culture is very self-deprecating. It's been an underdog country its entire existence. So it's very disdainful of authority, very suspicious of authority. And it's got that kind of working class humility to it. And it's a very deeply literary culture, I find, too. And then on the other hand, the US is much more entrepreneurial, right? And is just an incredibly successful country. Like, more people want to go to the US, including myself, than any other country in the world, right? It's just this beacon of success in all sorts of ways. So, but they're very, very different. How to check your own bias and see if you're overestimating the benefits of the 2 days of additional work. Well, yeah, so we might be wrong, right? That was my very first point. And talking through it collaboratively is pretty important, right? Talking through your recommendations and really getting a sense for, do I have a bias here? Am I being optimistic or overly rosy about like what the right thing I think is? And so you have to have that open-mindedness. I don't know that I have any like tactical tips for how to do that. Any good references on books to get better at such communication. I'm going to talk more in another soft skills talk about communicating and like how to have meetings and how to like interact with people because I had to work on that a lot. But what has worked for me is the more I read, I used to read a lot of nonfiction and would pretty much only read nonfiction, but just reading biographies and reading novels really helped me because it gave me, an approach to empathy that wasn't, just my day-to-day life, right? It puts you literally in, like a great novel will put you literally in the mind of other people and help you see their motivations and how you go. Reading Tolstoy, like there's a lot of that, or Shakespeare, right? So I found that very useful, and I did a lot of that in my 20s. I feel like it helped. Which I don't know, that might be a surprising recommendation, but that's what worked for me. Crucial Conversations. There's a recommendation right there in the chat. Apparently that's a book. Never read it, but looks good from the recommendation. How much a lack of willingness to take risks? How much does a lack of willingness to take risks when dealing with the context? How much does that factor in? If people just aren't willing to take risks, any kind of change can be hard, right? And producing environments that reward risk is its own huge topic. We have lots of ways we try to do that at Amazon. We generally don't punish failure, reward failure in a lot of cases. It's pretty important. And Ryan has a great point, which I didn't make, was at Amazon we differentiate between one-way decisions and one-way door decisions and two-way door decisions, which is we try to explicitly focus more on if something's reversible, if a decision can be undone, we don't try to spend as much time on it because you can just try it, and if it doesn't work, back out. Whereas there's a one-way door decision, which we'll pour more collaborative effort into because, if you get it wrong, you're in trouble. How can young engineers, which are often the people closest to the problems, influence cultural issues, often driven by senior members of the team? Yeah, that's a tough one. So for starters, young engineers are typically the people closest to the problems, and they are the folks who are, in the trenches, dealing with the day-to-day reality. If there are cultural issues driven by senior members of the team that are harmful or toxic or wrong, well, first, be a bit open-minded yourself and consider, are they doing that thing I talked about where they're trying to help you develop good habits? Because it can feel like they're being vindictive or an asshole, even when they're not, even when they're being incredibly polite, even when they're being, I've been involved in investigating HR complaints a few times where, a junior engineer perceives that they're, from their perspective, being bullied, right? Like they're, I can never seem to get my code reviews in, this person drags me out every time. It takes them like 10 rounds before we get to a ship it. And I dig in and I go, well, looks like they're doing this to everybody. And it also looks like every piece of feedback they're giving you is correct. Like they gave you these 10 things to fix and you only fixed 3 of them. Like there were still 7 left, and now I'm not saying, malicious, toxic code reviews couldn't be part of bullying. It could be, like bullying can happen in the workplace, so it shouldn't ever. But, but I've definitely also seen cases where like the person just felt like, because it feels bad, right? Like you're getting this negative feedback. Like when I've been in the end of it myself, right? So I sometimes write docs and press releases that go out on behalf of Amazon, right? And Andy Jassy, our CEO, like personally reviews them, right? Like he spends his own time on that stuff because he thinks it's so important, wants to make sure we represent the business well. And he'll give me like all these little things and he'll catch these errors in my writing, right? Just a lot of it's dumb mistakes, Sometimes I'll use an article like it it or them, but it's not clear, there's two subjects in the sentence, which one am I referring to? Like boneheaded stuff, but he catches them anyway because he's really, really good at those details. And I'll just feel like terrible. I'm just like, oh my God. But there's nothing personal about it at all, right? It's just I'm learning from it each time. And it's the same with like that kind of code review situation, right? So sometimes as a junior engineer, it can feel like you're being bullied or victimized, but absolutely is not what is happening. Sometimes that is just what it is like at the start of our careers, like sometimes someone just has to help you figure out what those standards look like, and can be a bit painful to get through. If genuine bullying is happening and there's like all sorts of other content, all sorts of other avenues, and it's very personal and all those, that's a different issue. That should never happen. There should be ways to remedy all that, But, so first be open-minded to that possibility. And then if it's not that, right, if it's, this person is being toxic, it's personal, or they're ruining the whole team, leave. It's pretty much the number one way you can influence it. We're very fortunate in this industry that at least for most of us in most locations, we have the ability to go elsewhere, whether it's other teams in the same company, hopefully, especially if you work at Amazon, or other employers. Like you don't have to put up with it. And that is the number one way, honestly, you can influence that culture, right? But if you're really committed to the team, if you're really passionate about that space, and you're willing to bear those cultural toxicities for like a greater purpose, that's understandable too. And then what you can do is you want to build relationships with the folks that are more senior again than those senior members of the team, right? And you want to build relationships with like their management, or even skip if you can, or other senior engineers not on your team. Make friends with a principal engineer if there are any nearby, and so on. But make alliances, and then have them help you, tackle that team, and work on that toxicity. It can be hard. It's not easy, but that's what I'd say. And all right, that is the end of all the questions. Hopefully this was useful. Let me know if these soft skill things are useful. These are the kinds of conversations I've definitely had in one-on-ones. I've got a bunch more topics like this packed up. I don't know if I'll do them in a row, or we'll just go back and forth between more technical topics and stuff like this. So if you've got an opinion either way, let me know. And thanks for watching. I'm really going to try to get everything up on YouTube. Thanks again.